Well, my right eye still has a vision problem because gas is flowing inside. But so I thought just covering my right eye will help. It does somehow. But when reading the gospel, because this thing doesn't cover the eye entirely, I was a little bit confused. So if I get confused just during the sermon as well, please excuse me for this. Well, I wasn't able to preach for last 2 weeks, and that meant that I didn't get to talk about Ecclesiastes, the middle part of the Ecclesiastes, and we are covering only the first part and the last part of Ecclesiastes. Although you read it in the service, we read the middle part in the service. So the middle part is basically elaborating on the theme of everything is pointless. Everything is pointless. That's what he said at the beginning, and he just shows how things are pointless. And I said 3 weeks ago that being pointless here means as it is observed. God is not making a pronouncement saying that everything is pointless, because it's God's creation. But as humans, as we observe the things around, everything seems to be pointless. And that's what he's saying. And the teacher of the assembly, as he calls himself, comes to conclusion in today's reading. That is, that if everything is pointless, we should really worship God. And he, toward the end, quite close to today's reading, actually changes his address to one person, because he says, "Rejoice, young person, while you are young." And I suppose here the young person is an imaginary person rather than a specific person. But anyway, he's really addressing one person. He's as if just addressing each of us separately. And today's reading is addressed to that young person as well. And he comes to conclusion in today's reading. And we can say his conclusion really lies on the first part and the last part of today's reading. Because in the first part of today's reading, first sentence that we read says, "Remember your Creator in your prime time." I think this sentence is so important that we need to really examine this sentence word by word. First, remember, it says. Remember here means not remembering just as a vague memory or something like that, but really strongly remembering, recognizing, understanding, thinking about Him. Remember actively. But he didn't use the word discover or seek, even as common in the Bible. He used the word remember because the idea of God, it really is embedded in our creation. So we actually know God from the very beginning, from the babyhood. Even the babies have some sense of God. And that's why we baptize the babies, because we believe that they can actually worship God, even in the very beginning. So we have the sense of God, but if we don't know God when we grew up, it is because we have forgotten. That's why he used the word remember. Come back to your sense. Just as the prodigal son, as commonly called the son in our gospel reading, came to his senses when there was a famine in the land. So remember, if you had not remembered up to now, if you had not remembered the recognized God up to now, remember God. But he didn't say remember God, but he said remember your Creator. I think this is the only time that he used the word Creator in the whole book. He refers God as the Creator. He says, he refers him to as your Creator because he is really saying, remember him as the Creator. It is important to remember that he created us. He's the creator of everything. And furthermore, he doesn't simply say, remember the Creator, but remember your Creator. And your here is a singular you, as he was addressing one imaginary person. But that singular you is important because it's not just saying he's the creator of all universe, but he especially created me. To remember that he created me. And if he created me, there must be purpose in my life. Although everything looks pointless, there must be purpose in my life. So remember your Creator here means, besides remembering God, means that you remember that He created you for purpose. Remind yourself of this one fact, that you are created for purpose. And remember Him in your prime time. So in your prime time here means while you are young. And as he's addressing young person. And this is important because some people, when I just ask them really to come to God, they will say, okay, well, I know God exists, but I really want to enjoy my life while I'm young, so I'll just go ahead and enjoy myself. And when I get older, when I'm closer to death, then maybe I'll turn to God. Some people say this, young people. But that's grossly misunderstanding what is at stake. If everything is pointless, then enjoying yourself is not really enjoying themselves is not enjoying themselves, really. They are just pursuing pointless things. And leaving out something is important. If they really want to enjoy themselves, they have to remember God. So it is important to remember God in your prime time, in your youth, as soon as possible, as early as possible. Again, starting even from babyhood. That's why we baptize even babies. Well, last week, the tennis world was shocked by the sudden announcement of Ash Barty, number one in the world, to retire at the age of 25. And she seemed to be wanting to pursuing something else, but we don't really know what she's going to do from now on. But one thing seems to be clear to me, that whatever she wants to pursue from now on, she thought that it was important to pursue it when she was young. That's why she retired early from tennis, so that she can pursue something else when she's young. In the same way, if you really think that it is important to remember God, then we better do it as early as possible. And he's really saying when you're young, but what about those of us who do not think that we are young? Well, there's a saying that better late than never. So that's why I use the word as soon as possible, as early as possible. Even if you are very old, it's still better to pursue God, to seek God, to remember God, when you are still not older, at least. Because at least, although you are late, you are still doing it when you have a chance. And he says, to elaborate this point, in your prime time, he says, before the days of trouble arrive, and those years about which you will say, I take no pleasure in them. So there will be time that when you feel that you really cannot do what you want to do. So you just want to seek God and remember God, but you have a limited ability. So it is better to do it early. And he expands on this point in the next few lines, because it says all before and before. And they are all descriptions about the time when it is difficult, and many times using the figurative languages. And after that few lines, then he moves really to the point of death, because he says, when the human goes to the eternal abode, And later, before the dust returns into earth as it was before, and the life breath returns to God who gave it. These are all the description of death. So we have to remember that we will eventually die. At least most of us, of course, those people who are alive when Jesus comes back will not face death, but for most of us, death is the reality that we cannot avoid. And especially this week, we are reminded of this reality as we lost our dear friend, Father Rob McQueen, who has been very good to all of us who have been here for long enough. So, with that in mind, we know that death is reality. And while it is true that we will rise again when Jesus comes back, at least before that time, this is the one life that we can live. If we have only one life to live, let's make it counted. That it is let's devoted to something important, not to something pointless. And therefore, as it is he is really contrasting what is meaningful and what is pointless. He repeats what he said at the beginning and over in the book. Perfectly pointless. Everything is pointless. So it is with this understanding that everything is pointless that we also understand that the only thing that counts is to remember God. If all other things are pointless, let's just make it clear that this is what really matters. And indeed, he says this is what really matters at the end of the book. As we just skipped a few lines in our reading, which is a description of his teaching a little bit, to come to the very last part of the book. And at the last part of the book, he says, so this is the end of the matter. In other words, this is what is most important. This is what I wanted to say by saying everything is pointless. This is the conclusion that I was leading you to, which is worship God and keep God's commandments. So remembering God really leads to worshiping God. And the word worship here literally means fear God. But if in our modern English, if you will use the word fear, it means be afraid of and be even avoiding that. Of course, we don't mean when we say fear God, it doesn't mean to avoid God. That's why modern translations avoid that translation of that word, fearing God. But fearing God means recognizing His greatness and having the sense of awe and have the reverence toward God. That's what it means, worshiping God. Or that's what worshiping God here means. And if we truly worship God, the way to worship God, because here worship doesn't mean just coming to Sunday service, but worship in your life, the way to worship God is to keep His commandments. In the language of our New Testament reading, be reconciled to God. Keeping His commandments is the way to be reconciled to God and to worship God. Because this is what everyone must do. Literally, in the original language, it simply says, this is everyone, which doesn't make sense. It's a kind of broken sentence. But I think the teacher used this broken sentence for effect by saying, this is everyone, which doesn't have good meaning, but she really wants to say, give the sense of this is really important. This is the only thing that has a point in the pointless world. It is the only meaningful thing for everyone. That's what he wants to say. And then after that he says, God will definitely bring every deed to judgment including every hidden things, whether good or bad. And this is the last sentence of the book. And that gives one more motive to worship God. The first motive was that that's the only thing with meaning. That's the only thing that has a point. But the second reason is that God is a God of judgment. God will judge his people. And he judges even things hidden. So he knows our motives, he knows our hearts. In other words, he knows who are the people who worship God in their minds, and who are the people who are pursuing pointless things. And God will judge according to that. So perfectly pointless, says the teacher. And we have to heed these words. Perfectly pointless when we leave the Creator out of the picture. When we don't think of God, everything is pointless. So if that's the case, the only way to have meaning, the only way to have a point, the only way to avoid pointlessness is to remember God, remember our Creator, and the purpose of creation. Remember that God created me for a purpose. So I can fulfill God's purpose by worshiping God. Because the only way to keep His purpose is to have reverence of Him and worship Him through our lives. As I said, the point He's making in this particular passage is not really about Sunday worship, but worshiping through our lives. In other words, by obeying His commandments, by keeping His commandments. That's what really counts. And if we have only one life to live, it is better to start early. Don't waste your time, waste your life by pursuing things that are meaningless, but pursue the right thing, which is worshiping God. And why worshiping God really includes your daily life. So it doesn't mean that the things that you are doing, you have to stop before you have to stop. It means that you are doing it for the purpose of worshiping God now, even though you are doing the same thing, possibly. Now it gives a meaning to your life. So, to live a meaningful life, let's worship God and keep His commandments, because that's the end of the matter. To stand in awe of God, and thus we follow His way. Let us do that and keep our lives meaningful. Glory be to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.